Maya Rodriguez thought she had buried the past along with her sister's memory. But when Vincent Torres walked back into her courtroom, not as a defendant this time, but as the city's most brilliant defense attorney, she realized some ghosts refused to stay buried. "7 years had passed since Maya Rodriguez stood in that courthouse, her voice steady and unwavering as she delivered her closing argument. The jury had returned a guilty verdict for Vincent Torres in the murder of her sister Elena. She remembered the weight of victory settling on her shoulders like a mantle she wasn't sure she deserved. The conviction had launched her career, transforming her from a grieving sister into the city's most promising prosecutor. But victory, Maya had learned, tasted different than she'd imagined. It was bitter, metallic, like blood in her mouth during those sleepless nights when Elena's laugh echoed through her dreams. She had buried her grief beneath ambition, telling herself that justice was healing. That success was the best tribute to her sister's memory. Elena had been everything Maya wasn't: spontaneous where Maya was careful, artistic where Maya was analytical, trusting where Maya had learned to be suspicious. They had shared a small apartment near the university, their lives intertwined in the easy way of sisters who genuinely liked each other as much as they loved each other. Elena had been studying art therapy, planning to work with children, her whole life stretching ahead of her like a canvas waiting for paint. The night Elena died, Maya had been at the law library studying for finals. She had ignored 3 calls from her sister, too focused on her constitutional law outline to answer. By the time she listened to her voicemails, Elena was already gone. The guilt of those unanswered calls had driven Maya harder than any ambition ever could. The years that followed blurred together in a symphony of cases won and criminals convicted. Maya's reputation grew like ivy on courthouse walls, beautiful, admired, but perhaps covering cracks that ran deeper than anyone suspected. She lived alone in her downtown apartment, surrounded by legal briefs and case files, her personal life a casualty of her professional dedication. Her colleagues saw strength where there was really just stubborn determination. Her superiors saw brilliance where there was actually just an inability to let go. Maya had become exactly what she thought Elena would have wanted her to be: successful, respected, untouchable. She had channeled her grief into a laser focus that made her devastating in court and empty at home. The apartment she shared with Elena had been sold within a month of the trial's conclusion. Maya couldn't bear to live there anymore, surrounded by reminders of laughter that would never return. She had moved to a sterile high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the city but no warmth. No memories, no ghosts lurking in familiar corners. Her social life had withered like a plant forgotten in a dark room. Friends from law school had gradually stopped calling when Maya consistently chose work over dinner invitations. Romantic relationships died quick deaths when potential partners realized they would always come second to whatever case Maya was prosecuting. She told herself she was too busy for love, too focused for frivolity, too dedicated to be distracted by ordinary human needs. But on quiet Sunday mornings, when the courthouse was empty and the city moved at a gentler pace, Maya sometimes wondered if she had built her entire life on a foundation of sand. She would sit in her minimalist living room, surrounded by legal journals and case files, and feel the crushing weight of a success that had cost her everything that mattered. The truth was that Maya had been running for 7 years, from grief, from guilt, from the terrifying possibility that justice might not be the same thing as healing. She had convinced herself that putting criminals behind bars would somehow bring Elena back, that each conviction was a love letter to her sister's memory. But in the quiet moments between cases, she could feel the hollowness at the center of her carefully constructed life. She was about to discover just how unstable that foundation really was. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Maya sat in her corner office reviewing case files with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. The morning sun streamed through her windows, illuminating the wall of diplomas and commendations that testified to her professional success. She had arrived at the office before dawn, as was her habit, finding comfort in the quiet hours before the courthouse came alive with the day's business. Her assistant knocked on the door with an expression that mixed excitement and apprehension. Jenny had been working for Maya for 3 years. long enough to recognize when something unusual was about to disrupt their carefully ordered routine. "There's someone here to see you," Jenny said, her voice carrying an odd note that made Maya look up from her files. "He says it's about the Elena Rodriguez case." Maya's pen stilled in her hand, a drop of ink spreading slowly across the legal pad where she had been making notes. No one discussed that case anymore. It was closed, sealed, archived in the basement of the courthouse along with hundreds of other solved murders. She had specifically requested that any inquiries about Elena's case be directed elsewhere, unwilling to revisit the details that still haunted her dreams. "Tell them to make an appointment through proper channels," Maya replied, not looking up from her work. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to speak of her sister's case in the same professional tone she used for any other legal matter. "He said you'd want to see him immediately." Jenny hesitated, fidgeting with the folder in her hands. "It's Vincent Torres." The name hit Maya like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her hands tremble against the smooth surface of her desk. Vincent Torres, the man she had put away, the man whose life she had systematically dismantled in front of 12 jurors. But that was impossible. He was serving a life sentence in Millbrook Correctional Facility, locked away where he could never hurt anyone again. "That's not possible," Maya said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "His conviction was overturned on appeal 6 months ago," Jenny explained, her words falling like hammer blows against Maya's composure. "New evidence, procedural errors. He's been released and, well, he's passed the bar exam. He's a defense attorney now." Maya's world tilted sideways, the familiar landmarks of her life suddenly seeming foreign and unstable. She gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white against the dark wood. 6 months. He had been free for 6 months, walking the same streets she walked, breathing the same air, and she hadn't known. How was that possible? How had the system she served so faithfully failed to inform her that the man she had sent away was free? The implications crashed over her like a wave. If Vincent Torres had been wrongfully convicted, if new evidence had emerged that proved his innocence, then Maya had sent an innocent man to prison. She had built her entire career on that case, used Elena's murder as a stepping stone to professional success, and it had all been based on a lie. When Vincent Torres walked into her office, Maya's first thought was that prison had changed him in ways she never could have anticipated. The uncertain young man who had sat in the defendant's chair was gone, replaced by someone who carried himself with quiet authority. His shoulders were broader, his presence more commanding. The fear that had marked his features during the trial had been replaced by a calm confidence that made the air in the room feel thinner. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that spoke of success and careful attention to detail. His dark hair was professionally styled, his posture straight and sure. Everything about him suggested a man who had not merely survived his ordeal, but had been transformed by it into something stronger and more purposeful. "Hello, Maya," he said, and his voice was different too, deeper, more assured, carrying undertones of education and refinement that hadn't been there before. "You look well." Maya stood slowly, every prosecutor's instinct screaming at her to call security, to demand he leave, to protect herself from the man who represented everything she had tried to forget. But her voice, when it came, was steady and professional. "What do you want?" Vincent moved into the room with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there, taking in the details of her office with the careful observation of a man who had learned to read environments and people with surgical precision. His eyes lingered on the photograph of Elena that sat on Maya's desk, the only personal item in her otherwise sterile workspace. "I want to work with you," he said, settling into the chair across from Maya's desk, as if he had every right to be there. The words were so unexpected, so completely contrary to anything Maya might have imagined, that for a moment she couldn't process their meaning. Work with her? The man she had wrongfully imprisoned wanted to work with her. The man she had destroyed wanted to be her partner. Vincent settled into the chair across from Maya's desk as if he belonged there, as if the past 7 years had been nothing more than an extended absence. His eyes never left her face, and Maya found herself cataloging the changes that imprisonment and freedom had wrought in ways that felt both professional and disturbingly personal. Gone was the frightened young man who had sat in the defendant's chair, replaced by someone who carried himself like he owned the world. His dark hair was shorter now, professionally styled to complement the sharp lines of his face. His suit was expensive, well-tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. Everything about him spoke of success, of power reclaimed, of a man who had not merely survived his ordeal, but had been forged by it into something harder and more refined. "There's a case," Vincent began, his voice calm and measured, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. "The Morrison murder. You're prosecuting, I'm defending. But I have a proposition that goes beyond our professional opposition." Maya forced herself to sit, to project the same professional calm she used in courtroom negotiations. She had spent years perfecting her poker face, learning to hide her emotions behind a mask of competent detachment. "I don't make deals with defense attorneys in my office." "This isn't about the Morrison case," Vincent said, leaning forward slightly. Maya caught a hint of his cologne, something sophisticated and entirely different from the man she remembered. It spoke of confidence, of success, of a life rebuilt from ashes. "This is about us working together, permanently." The word us hung in the air between them like a challenge, loaded with implications that Maya wasn't ready to consider. She felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't say whether it was from anger, fear, or something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to curiosity. "You're insane if you think I would ever—" Maya began. But Vincent continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I've opened my own practice," he said, his tone suggesting that this was a fact rather than a boast. "Tora's defense. I specialize in complex criminal cases, particularly those involving prosecutorial misconduct or wrongful convictions. I've had remarkable success in my first year of practice." Maya stared at him, searching his face for some sign that this was an elaborate joke or revenge fantasy. The idea that Vincent Torres, the man whose life she had destroyed, had not only survived prison, but had emerged to become a successful attorney was almost too much to process. "I need an experienced prosecutor to help me understand the other side," Vincent continued, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Someone who can help me anticipate prosecution strategies, who knows how the system really works from the inside. The salary would be triple what you're making here, with full partnership track and complete autonomy over your caseload." Maya felt as if she were listening to someone speak a foreign language. "You want me to quit my job and work for you?" "With me," Vincent corrected, and there was something in his tone that suggested the distinction was important to him. "Equal partnership. Torres and Rodriguez, attorneys at law. We would specialize in criminal defense, with particular emphasis on cases involving prosecutorial overreach or systemic injustice." The audacity of it stole Maya's breath. This man, whose life she had destroyed, whose freedom she had taken based on evidence that had apparently been flawed or insufficient, was sitting in her office offering her a partnership, offering her a chance to build something new from the ruins of what she had inadvertently destroyed. "7 years ago, you convinced a jury that I was a killer," Vincent said quietly, his voice taking on a more personal note. "You were wrong, but you were brilliant. I watched you work, Maya. I studied you. Even when I hated you, I admired your skill." There was something in his voice that made Maya's skin prickle with awareness, an intensity that went beyond professional admiration, something that felt personal and immediate and entirely too complicated for her to process. "I spent 7 years in prison thinking about that trial," Vincent continued, his gaze never wavering from her face. "Thinking about every argument you made, every piece of evidence you presented, every strategic choice you employed. You dismantled my defense with surgical precision. You were wrong about my guilt, but you were absolutely right about everything else." Maya found herself leaning forward despite her better judgment, drawn in by the intensity of his words and the strange compliment buried within them. "I need someone who can think like you do," Vincent said, his voice dropping to something that felt almost intimate. "Someone who can anticipate prosecution strategies, who knows how the system really works, who can help me protect innocent people from going through what I went through. You're the best prosecutor in this city, Maya. I want you on my side this time." Maya stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the courthouse steps, where she had once watched Vincent being led away in handcuffs. The memory felt like something from another lifetime, overlaid now with the impossible reality of the man sitting behind her. "This is insane," she said, her voice barely steady. "Do you have any idea what people would say? What they would think?" "I don't care what they think." Vincent's voice was closer now, and Maya realized he had followed her to the window. She could feel the warmth of him behind her, could sense his presence like electricity in the air. "I care what you think." Maya turned to face him, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her take a step back. There was something there that went far beyond professional interest, something that made her pulse race and her mouth go dry. It was the look of a man who had thought about her for far too long, who had built up an image of her in his mind that might have very little to do with reality. "Why?" she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Why would you want to work with me after what I did to you?" Vincent's smile was soft, almost tender, transforming his entire face in a way that made Maya's heart skip. "Because, Maya Rodriguez, you've been the most important person in my life for 7 years. Even when you were destroying me, you were the only thing that mattered." His words sounded dangerously close to a love confession. Maya thought that refusing Vincent's offer would end things. She was wrong in ways that became more apparent with each passing day. Over the following weeks, Vincent Torres appeared everywhere in her life like a persistent shadow with impeccable timing. He was at the coffee shop where she bought her morning latte, casually reading a newspaper at a corner table and looking up to smile at her as she passed. He was in the courthouse lobby, chatting with other attorneys about cases and legal precedents, but his eyes always found her across the crowded space, tracking her movement with an intensity that made her skin warm. The courthouse was a small world, and Maya quickly realized that Vincent had made himself a fixture in it. He attended every bar association meeting, every legal seminar, every professional gathering where she might appear. He was charming, intelligent, and had an impressive reputation for winning difficult cases. Other attorneys spoke of him with respect, even admiration. Completely unaware of the complicated history between him and the prosecutor, he seemed to watch with such careful attention, but it was the flowers that truly unsettled her. They began arriving. On Monday morning, a single white rose on her desk with no card, no signature, nothing to indicate their origin except the lingering fragrance that made her think of weddings and new beginnings. Maya threw it away, assuming it was a mistake, perhaps meant for another attorney in the building. Tuesday brought 2 roses, arranged in a simple crystal vase that hadn't been there the night before. Wednesday, 3 roses, each one perfect and fresh, positioned precisely in the center of her desk where she couldn't ignore them. By Friday, her office looked like a garden, and Jenny was fielding questions from curious colleagues about Maya's secret admirer. The roses were joined by other flowers, lilies, tulips, small potted orchids that seemed to thrive in the fluorescent light of her office. Each arrangement was more sophisticated than the last, clearly chosen by someone with excellent taste and unlimited resources. "Just throw them away," Maya instructed. But even as she said it, she found herself looking forward to seeing what would arrive next. The flowers were beautiful, elegant, and entirely inappropriate for a professional setting. They were also impossible to ignore, filling her office with color and fragrance that made her think of gardens and sunshine and all the beautiful things she had forgotten to notice in her single-minded pursuit of justice. The gifts escalated beyond flowers, with a creativity that was both impressive and slightly unnerving. A first edition of her favorite novel appeared on her car windshield, wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a ribbon that matched her eyes. Her favorite pastries from the bakery across town were delivered to her office every Tuesday, accompanied by coffee from a shop she had mentioned loving, but rarely had time to visit. Someone had clearly been paying attention to details about her life that she hadn't realized were visible to casual observation. Maya found herself looking forward to these mysterious deliveries despite her better judgment. Each gift was thoughtful, perfectly chosen, clearly the result of careful observation and genuine care. They spoke of someone who had noticed what she liked, what made her smile, what small luxuries she denied herself in her relentless focus on work. Then came the legal briefs. Vincent began filing motions in the Morrison case that were works of art, brilliant, creative, and clearly designed to showcase his abilities to her specifically. He cited cases she had mentioned in law review articles, used reasoning that mirrored her own legal philosophy, constructed arguments that felt like conversations meant just for her. It was as if he was courting her through the law itself, using their shared profession as a language for expressing things that couldn't be said directly. His motions were so well crafted that Maya found herself studying them long after she had formulated her responses. They revealed a legal mind that was sophisticated, creative, and thoroughly grounded in constitutional principles. This was not the uncertain young man she had prosecuted 7 years ago. This was someone who had used his time in prison to transform himself into a formidable legal scholar. This has to stop. Maya confronted him after a particularly impressive motion nearly got her key evidence thrown out. She found him in the courthouse law library, surrounded by books and looking entirely too pleased with himself. The library was quiet at this hour, empty except for a few clerks organizing files and the soft sound of pages turning. "What has to stop?" Vincent asked innocently, though his eyes sparkled with mischief and something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "The flowers, the gifts, whatever this is." Maya gestured helplessly, feeling foolish for even acknowledging what had been happening. "It's inappropriate. We're opposing counsel." "Is there a rule against sending flowers to opposing counsel?" Vincent closed his book and gave her his full attention, his dark eyes focusing on her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly self-conscious. "I must have missed that in legal ethics." Maya felt her cheeks warm, frustrated by how easily he could throw her off balance. "It's not about rules. It's about what, Maya?" Vincent stood, moving closer to her with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "About the fact that you keep the roses, that you ate the pastries, that you've read every motion I've filed with the kind of attention usually reserved for poetry." Maya's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. How did he know she had kept some of the roses, dried between the pages of her law books like pressed flowers from a long-ago romance? How did he know she had analyzed his legal work like literature, marveling at the elegance of his arguments and the sophistication of his reasoning? "I pay attention, Maya," Vincent said softly, his voice carrying undertones that made her pulse quicken. "I've been paying attention to you for 7 years. First from a prison cell, reading every case you won in the newspapers, then from law school, watching your career flourish while I rebuilt my own life. Now from across a courtroom, seeing you work your magic." The intensity in his voice made Maya's heart race. This was moving beyond professional admiration into territory that felt dangerous and entirely too personal. "Vincent, you can't," she began, but he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Can't what? Can't admire the woman who taught me that brilliance and passion can coexist? Can't respect the prosecutor who showed me that the law is an art form as much as a science? Can't fall in love with someone who has been the center of my world since the day I met her?" The word love hung between them like a confession and a challenge. Maya stared at him, her pulse thundering in her ears, her mouth dry with shock and something that felt dangerously close to reciprocal feeling. "You don't love me," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. "You can't. I destroyed your life." Vincent's smile was gentle, understanding, transforming his face in a way that made Maya's heart skip. "You saved my life, Maya. You made me into someone worthy of loving you." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with words that would haunt her dreams. The Morrison trial became something unprecedented in Maya's career, a case where the opposing counsel seemed more interested in impressing her than in winning. Vincent's courtroom performance was mesmerizing, each argument crafted like a love letter, each cross-examination designed to showcase his evolution from the frightened defendant she once knew into something altogether more formidable and attractive. Maya found herself looking forward to his opening statements, his objections, his closing arguments. He had a way of making legal proceedings feel like conversations meant just for her. When he addressed the jury, his eyes would find hers across the courtroom, and she would feel as if he were speaking directly to her heart, using the language of law to express feelings that had no place in a professional setting. The transformation in Vincent was remarkable to witness. The uncertain young man who had once sat in the defendant's chair, clearly overwhelmed by the legal proceedings surrounding him, had been replaced by someone who commanded attention and respect. His arguments were sophisticated, his presence commanding, his understanding of legal principles both broad and deep. He moved through the courtroom with confidence, addressing judges and juries with the authority of someone who had earned his place through intelligence and hard work rather than birthright or privilege. But it was the way he looked at Maya that truly unsettled her professional equilibrium. There was something in his gaze that went beyond professional respect or even admiration. It was the look of a man who had thought about her for far too long, who had built up an image of her in his mind during years of forced separation, who saw her not just as a prosecutor, but as something much more personal and precious. "You're distracted," her colleague David observed, after Maya stumbled through what should have been a routine witness examination. They were standing in the courthouse hallway during a recess, and David's expression was concerned rather than accusatory. "That's not like you." Maya couldn't explain that she had been watching Vincent watch her, that his unwavering attention was making it impossible for her to focus on anything else. She couldn't admit that she had started choosing her outfits with his reactions in mind, or that she had caught herself checking her reflection in courthouse windows more often than she cared to count. The realization that she was beginning to care about his opinion, to seek his approval, was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'm fine," Maya said, but her voice lacked conviction. She wasn't fine. For the first time in her career, she was emotionally compromised by a case, and it had nothing to do with the defendant, and everything to do with the defense attorney, who seemed determined to court her through legal briefs and meaningful glances. The turning point came during a recess when Vincent approached her in the hallway, his expression more serious than she had seen it since he walked back into her life. The courthouse hallway was busy with lawyers, clerks, and court personnel, moving between hearings, but somehow Vincent managed to create a bubble of privacy around them with nothing more than his presence and the intensity of his focus. "Have dinner with me," he said without preamble, his voice carrying an undertone of command that made Maya's pulse quicken. "Absolutely not." Maya's response was automatic, but her voice lacked conviction. The idea of dinner with Vincent Torres was simultaneously appealing and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering what it would feel like to jump, not as opposing counsel, Vincent clarified, his dark eyes never leaving her face. As two people who have been orbiting each other for 7 years. As a man who has never stopped thinking about a woman who changed the course of his entire life. Maya looked around the busy courthouse hallway, acutely aware that their conversation was drawing curious glances from colleagues and court personnel. The last thing she needed was more gossip about her professional relationship with Vincent Torres. "Vincent, we can't. You know we can't." Maya's protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Tell me you don't feel it," Vincent said quietly, stepping closer to her. "Tell me you don't wonder what would happen if we stopped fighting each other and started fighting for something together." Maya's breath caught. She did feel it, the electric current that seemed to run between them whenever they were in the same room, the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, the dangerous attraction that was growing stronger every day despite her best efforts to ignore it. "One dinner," Vincent continued, his voice dropping to something that felt almost intimate despite the public setting. "Away from the courthouse, away from the case. Just two people getting to know each other without the weight of the past between us." Maya knew she should say no. Every rational part of her mind was screaming warnings about ethical violations, professional impropriety, the impossibility of any relationship between them. Her career had been built on careful choices, strategic thinking, and absolute dedication to professional standards. Vincent Torres represented everything that could destroy that carefully constructed life. But there was something in Vincent's eyes that made her want to be reckless for once in her carefully controlled existence. Something that promised the possibility of a life beyond case files and closing arguments, beyond the hollow success that had been her only companion for 7 years. "If I say yes," she heard herself saying, "it doesn't mean anything. It's just dinner." Vincent's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face in a way that made Maya's knees weak. "Just dinner," he agreed, but his eyes promised so much more. That evening, as Maya stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear to dinner with the man she had once sent to prison, she realized that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict or control. The careful barriers she had built around her heart were beginning to crumble, and she wasn't sure whether that was a disaster or a miracle. She was about to discover that some hungers could no longer be denied. The restaurant Vincent chose was intimate and dimly lit, the kind of place where conversations could remain private and the outside world felt very far away. Maya arrived 5 minutes late, a deliberate choice designed to maintain some sense of control over a situation that already felt dangerously beyond her ability to manage. Vincent was already seated at a corner table that offered privacy and a view of the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. When he stood to greet her, Maya's breath caught at how different he looked away from the courthouse. Gone was the sharp professional armor of his courtroom attire, replaced by a simple black sweater and dark jeans that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. "You came," he said, and there was genuine surprise and gratitude in his voice, as if he had been prepared for her to change her mind at the last moment. "I said I would." Maya allowed him to pull out her chair, trying to ignore the way his fingers brushed against her shoulders as he helped her settle at the table. The simple touch sent electricity through her system, a reminder that it had been far too long since anyone had treated her with such careful attention. The first hour passed in surprisingly easy conversation about neutral topics: books they had read, places they had traveled, the changes in the city over the past few years. Vincent was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories that revealed glimpses of the man he had become during his years of forced solitude. He spoke of his time in prison not with bitterness but with a kind of philosophical acceptance that suggested he had found ways to transform suffering into wisdom. Maya found herself relaxing despite her better judgment, drawn in by Vincent's intelligence and the unexpected ease of their conversation. He was nothing like the uncertain young man she remembered from 7 years ago. Prison had refined him, educated him, given him a perspective on life and justice that was both hard-won and deeply thoughtful. It wasn't until the wine arrived that the conversation took a more dangerous turn. "Can I ask you something?" Vincent said, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass in a gesture that was both casual and oddly hypnotic. "That last day of the trial, when the jury came back with the verdict, you looked so sad. Not victorious, not satisfied, sad." Maya's hand stilled on her fork. She remembered that moment with crystalline clarity, remembered the hollow feeling that had settled in her chest as Vincent was led away in handcuffs. She had expected to feel triumph, closure, the satisfaction of justice served. Instead, she had felt empty, as if she had just participated in something that diminished rather than elevated the cause of justice. "I thought I would feel different," she admitted quietly, surprised by her own honesty. "I thought justice would feel like resolution. Instead, it felt like I had just broken something that could never be repaired." "You did what you believe was right," Vincent said, his voice gentle and free of the bitterness she might have expected. "You were trying to get justice for Elena. I understand that now." Maya looked up at him, surprised by the lack of accusation in his voice. "How can you not hate me? I stole 7 years of your life." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and understood in equal measure. "Do you want to know what I thought about during those 7 years? What kept me sane when everything else felt impossible?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "I thought about you," Vincent said simply, his words falling into the quiet space between them like stones into still water. "About your passion for justice, your brilliant mind, the way you fought so fiercely for what you believed in. Even when that fighting was directed at me, I couldn't help but admire it. You became my inspiration, Maya. You showed me what it meant to care about something bigger than yourself." Maya's eyes filled with unexpected tears. She had spent 7 years living with the guilt of sending an innocent man to prison. And here he was telling her that her prosecution of him had somehow inspired rather than destroyed him. "Vincent," she began. But he continued as if her interruption might derail a confession he had been preparing for years. "I fell in love with your dedication first," he said, his voice soft but intense, each word carefully chosen and delivered with quiet conviction. "Then with your intelligence. Then with the way you carried yourself in that courtroom like you owned the world. By the time I realized what was happening to me, it was too late. You had become everything to me." The confession hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Maya stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it across the table. The restaurant continued to buzz with quiet conversation around them, but she felt as if they were enclosed in a bubble of intimacy that made the rest of the world fade away. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You can't love someone who destroyed your life." Vincent's smile was tender, understanding, transforming his face in a way that made Maya's chest tight with emotion. "You didn't destroy my life, Maya, you redirected it. Everything I am now, everything I've accomplished, started with watching you work. You taught me that brilliance and passion could coexist, that fighting for what you believe in was worth any cost." Maya felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she made no effort to wipe it away. "I was wrong about you. I know that now. I put an innocent man in prison." "You put a lost, angry young man in prison," Vincent corrected gently, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "And somehow, miraculously, a better man came out. I'm not the same person I was 7 years ago, Maya. Prison forced me to examine my life, my choices, my priorities. I discovered that I wanted to be worthy of the woman who had seen through me so completely." Maya's breath caught at the warmth of his hand against hers. "Worthy of me? I love you, Maya Rodriguez," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the intimate space between them with quiet certainty. "I have loved you since the day you stood up in that courtroom and demanded justice for your sister. I loved you when you were tearing my alibi apart. I loved you when the verdict was read. I loved you through 7 years of separation. And I love you now, sitting across from me, finally letting me tell you the truth." Maya stared down at their joined hands, her mind reeling from the impossibility of his words and the undeniable sincerity with which he spoke them. The warmth of his palm against hers felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. She was falling in love with a man whose life she had destroyed, and she was helpless to stop it. The weeks that followed their dinner took on a dreamlike quality that Maya had never experienced before. Vincent's courtship intensified, but it transformed into something subtler, more sophisticated. Gone were the public displays of flowers and gifts, replaced by private moments that felt stolen from time itself. He would appear in the courthouse library when she was researching late into the evening, settling at a nearby table with his own work, but making his presence a comfort rather than a distraction. They developed a routine of shared silence punctuated by meaningful glances and small smiles that spoke of an understanding growing between them like a secret language. Maya found herself looking forward to these quiet encounters more than she cared to admit. There was something deeply satisfying about sharing space with Vincent, about the way he seemed to understand her need for concentration while making it clear that he enjoyed simply being near her. He never interrupted her work, never demanded her attention, but his presence filled the library with a warmth that made the long hours of research feel less solitary. The Morrison case was reaching its conclusion, and Maya found herself almost sad about it. Soon there would be no professional reason for them to be in the same courtroom, no excuse for the electric tension that had become as essential to her as breathing. The realization that she would miss seeing Vincent across the courtroom was both thrilling and terrifying. Vincent must have sensed her thoughts because he began leaving. Small notes and law books he knew she would need. Not love letters, but thoughtful observations about cases, quotes from legal scholars they had discussed, tiny proofs that he was thinking about her mind as much as her heart. Each note was carefully written in his precise handwriting, revealing an attention to detail that spoke of genuine care and consideration. Maya began collecting these notes without quite realizing it, pressing them between the pages of her personal law books like pressed flowers. She told herself it was merely professional courtesy, but she knew she was lying. There was something deeply intimate about these small communications, something that made her feel understood in ways she had never experienced before. "You're glowing," Jenny observed one morning, studying Maya's face with the intensity of a medical examiner. "Are you in love?" Maya's cheeks warmed, but she couldn't bring herself to deny it. The truth was written all over her face, in the way she smiled more readily, in the way she hummed softly while reviewing case files, in the way she seemed to carry herself with a lightness that had been absent for years. "It's complicated," Maya replied, which was perhaps the understatement of the century. "The good kind of complicated or the career-destroying kind?" Jenny asked with characteristic bluntness, her expression mixing concern with curiosity. Before Maya could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message from Vincent. "Meet me on the courthouse roof. Trust me." Maya stared at the message, her pulse quickening. She had never been to the courthouse roof, hadn't even known it was accessible. The idea of meeting Vincent in such a private, secluded place felt both dangerous and irresistibly appealing. 20 minutes later, she found herself climbing a narrow staircase she had never noticed before, following Vincent's precise directions through corridors that seemed designed to remain hidden from casual observation. The door at the top opened onto a flat rooftop that offered a stunning view of the city skyline, the late afternoon sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Vincent was waiting for her, leaning against the ledge with his suit jacket draped over the railing and his sleeves rolled up. The late afternoon sun caught the highlights in his dark hair, and when he smiled at her approach, Maya felt her knees go weak with the simple pleasure of seeing him happy. "How did you know about this place?" she asked, moving to stand beside him at the ledge. "I've had a lot of time to explore," Vincent replied, his voice carrying undertones of meaning that made Maya's skin prickle with awareness. 7 years of wondering what you could see from up here, what view you might enjoy. The simple statement hit Maya like a physical blow. Even in prison, he had been thinking about her, wondering about her happiness, her experiences, the small pleasures that might bring joy to her life. "Vincent," she began, but he turned to face her, and the words died in her throat. "I've been patient," he said quietly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. "I've been respectful of your boundaries, your career, your reputation. But Maya, I need you to know that my feelings for you aren't going away. If anything, they're getting stronger every day." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "The case is almost over. After that, I'm still going to love you," Vincent said simply, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "After that, I'm still going to want you in my life. After that, I'm still going to believe that we could be extraordinary together." Maya looked out over the city spread below them, trying to find the words for feelings that seemed too big for language. The view was breathtaking, the city stretching out in all directions like a promise of infinite possibility. "I've never felt this way before," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of traffic and city life. "I've spent so many years focused on my career, on being strong and independent and untouchable. I don't know how to be vulnerable." Vincent moved closer, and Maya could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You don't have to know how," he said softly. "We can figure it out together." Maya turned to look at him, and the tenderness in his eyes made her chest tight with emotion. "What if we destroy each other? What if this is too complicated, too impossible?" "Then we'll face that together too," Vincent replied, his voice steady and sure. "But Maya, what if we don't destroy each other? What if we save each other instead?" Before Maya could analyze or overthink or find reasons why it was impossible, Vincent's hand reached out to gently touch hers, and she found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by an invisible force. "I love you," Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible over the city sounds below. "I love your brilliant mind and your fierce heart, and the way you fight for what you believe in. I love how you've changed me, challenged me, made me want to be better than I ever thought possible." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling like both a confession and a surrender. "I've been trying not to, but I love you too." Vincent smiled then, a smile so full of joy and hope that it took Maya's breath away. Standing there with their hands intertwined, looking out over the city that had brought them together, Maya finally understood what it felt like to come home. Their confession felt like flying, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that their happiness was too perfect to last. The Morrison case concluded with Vincent securing an acquittal for his client, a brilliant victory that established his reputation as one of the city's most formidable defense attorneys. Maya felt an unexpected surge of pride watching him work, seeing the man she loved excel in the career that had grown from the ashes of his wrongful conviction. But their professional success only intensified the scrutiny surrounding their relationship. Courthouse gossip was vicious and persistent, with whispers following Maya through the corridors about her involvement with the man she had once sent to prison. The legal community was small and insular, and news of their relationship had spread like wildfire through the interconnected network of attorneys, judges, and court personnel. Maya began noticing the pointed looks, the conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way colleagues who had once sought her advice now seemed to maintain a careful distance. The weight of professional judgment was crushing, made worse by her own uncertainty about whether their relationship was worth the cost it seemed to be exacting on her carefully built reputation. "This has to stop," District Attorney Margaret Hayes said during what Maya had hoped would be a routine meeting about upcoming cases. Margaret's office was intimidating by design, with its dark wood paneling and walls lined with photographs of her with governors, senators, and Supreme Court justices. Maya kept her expression carefully neutral, drawing on years of courtroom experience to hide her inner turmoil. "I don't know what rumors you're referring to." "Don't insult my intelligence, Maya." Margaret's voice was sharp with disappointment, the tone of a mentor who felt betrayed by a promising protege. "Half the legal community is talking about your relationship with Vincent Torres. Do you have any idea how this reflects on this office? On your credibility as a prosecutor?" Maya's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. "My personal life has never interfered with my professional responsibilities." "Your personal life has become a professional liability," Margaret countered, leaning forward across her imposing desk. "The defense bar is already questioning whether your past cases with Torres were compromised. There are whispers about whether you threw the Morrison case to help your boyfriend." The accusation hit Maya like a slap, stealing her breath and making her vision blur with shock and outrage. "I have never compromised a case. My record speaks for itself." "Your record won't matter if people believe you're emotionally compromised," Margaret said, her tone softening slightly, as if she recognized she had pushed too hard. "Maya, you're one of our best prosecutors. You have a brilliant future ahead of you. Don't throw your career away for a man who should represent everything you stand against." Margaret's words followed Maya home, echoing in her mind as she sat in her apartment staring at her phone. Vincent had sent 3 text messages asking about dinner, about her day, about her unusually long silence. Each message was warm and caring, full of the affection that had become as natural as breathing between them. But for the first time since their relationship began, Maya found herself questioning whether love was enough to overcome the impossible circumstances that surrounded them. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to watch her career crumble because of whispers and innuendo. The apartment felt smaller than usual, filled with the oppressive weight of decisions that seemed to have no good answers. Maya had built her entire life around her professional identity, and the thought of losing that felt like losing herself. When Vincent arrived at her door an hour later, concern etched across his features, Maya's resolve crumbled at the sight of him. He had clearly come straight from his office, his tie loosened and his hair slightly mussed, but he looked wonderful and familiar, and like everything she hadn't realized she needed. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, reading her face with the accuracy that had become second nature to him. Maya told him about her meeting with Margaret, about the whispers and accusations, about the threat to her career. Vincent listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each revelation, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I'll fix this," he said when she finished, his voice fierce with protective anger. "I'll make a public statement. Clarify that our relationship began after the Morrison case. Make it clear that you maintained complete professional integrity." Maya shook her head, feeling suddenly exhausted by the weight of fighting battles that seemed designed to have no winners. "It won't matter. The damage is already done. People see what they want to see, believe what they want to believe. Vincent pulled her into his arms, and Maya allowed herself to sink into his warmth, to let his strength support her for a moment. She breathed in the familiar scent of his cologne, felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, and wondered how something that felt so right could be so wrong in the eyes of everyone else. "I won't let them destroy your career," Vincent said fiercely, his voice vibrating with determination. "Not after everything you've worked for, everything you've achieved." Maya looked up at him, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. "And I won't let them destroy you either. You've worked too hard to rebuild your life. Your reputation." They stood there holding each other, both understanding that they were facing a choice that might require sacrificing everything they had found together. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the words they couldn't bring themselves to say. "There has to be another way," Vincent said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya wished she could believe him, but the weight of reality was crushing. Sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes the world conspired against happiness with such systematic thoroughness that fighting back felt futile. Sometimes love meant letting go, even when holding on felt like the only thing worth fighting for. Maya spent the sleepless night walking through her apartment, weighing impossible choices with the methodical precision she usually reserved for legal arguments. She could fight for Vincent and risk everything she had built professionally. She could protect her career and lose the first man she had ever truly loved. Or she could find a third option that no one else had considered. By morning, her decision was made with the same certainty that had driven her through law school, through the bar exam, through 7 years of building a reputation that was now under attack. She called in sick to work and spent the day making phone calls, scheduling meetings, and setting in motion a plan that would change everything about her life. Her law school contacts proved invaluable, connecting her with attorneys who had made similar transitions, with bar association officials who could guide her through the necessary procedures, with potential clients who were interested in the unique services she was planning to offer. By evening, she was sitting across from Vincent in the same restaurant where he had first told her he loved her, armed with a manila folder that contained the blueprints for their future. "I have something to tell you," Maya began, her hands folded carefully on the table to hide their trembling. Vincent's face went very still, his dark eyes searching her expression for clues about what was coming. "You're ending this." "No," Maya said quickly, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, but not in the way you think." Vincent waited, his entire body tense with anticipation and dread. Maya took a deep breath, gathering her courage for the words that would transform both their lives. "I'm resigning from the district attorney's office." The words hung between them like a challenge to fate itself. Vincent's eyes widened with shock, then immediately filled with protest and protective concern. "Maya, no. You can't sacrifice your career for me. I won't let you." "You're not letting me do anything," Maya replied calmly, drawing on the same inner strength that had carried her through countless courtroom battles. "I'm choosing to do this. For me. For us. For the life I want to build." Vincent leaned forward, his voice intense with emotion and desperation. "Prosecuting is who you are. It's your calling, your passion. I won't be responsible for taking that away from you." Maya smiled, and for the first time in days, it felt completely genuine. "You're not taking it away. You're helping me transform it." She reached into her purse and pulled out the manila folder, placing it on the table between them like an offering. "Torres and Rodriguez, attorneys at law. Equal partners in a firm that will handle both prosecution and defense, working with the DA's office as independent contractors on special cases." Vincent stared at the folder, as if it contained dangerous explosives, his hands hovering over it but not quite touching. "I've already spoken with 3 other prosecutors who are interested in leaving the DA's office to work with us," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as she outlined the plan she had spent the day perfecting. "Sarah Chen from the White Collar Crime Division, Marcus Williams from Violent Crimes, and Rebecca Santos from the Appeals Unit. They're all frustrated with the bureaucracy and political constraints of working for the city. Vincent's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. Business plans, financial projections, partnership agreements, all meticulously prepared, all bearing both their names in elegant script. I've contacted the Bar Association about the licensing requirements for operating as independent contractors, Maya continued. There's precedent for this kind of arrangement. We would handle cases that the DA's office doesn't have the resources or expertise to pursue, while also providing defense services for clients who need our particular combination of skills. You've been planning this, Vincent said quietly, his voice filled with wonder and something that sounded like reverence. I've been dreaming this, Maya corrected, her heart racing with the excitement of sharing a vision that had crystallized with surprising clarity. Ever since that first day when you walked into my office and told me you wanted us to work together. I just needed time to figure out how to make it real. Vincent looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be partners in everything, business, life, the whole complicated mess of it. Maya reached across the table and took his hands in hers, feeling the warmth and strength that had become so familiar and necessary to her happiness. Vincent Torres, I have loved you since the day you walked back into my life and showed me that second chances exist. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to argue cases with you over breakfast. I want to build something beautiful and complicated and extraordinary with you. Vincent's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face in a way that made Maya's heart sing. Is that a proposal, Counselor Rodriguez? Maya's cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. Actually, I was hoping you might handle that part. You're much better at romantic gestures than I am. Vincent stood suddenly, moving around the table with fluid grace. Other diners began to notice, to whisper and point, but Maya found she didn't care about anything except the man who was about to change her life in the most wonderful way possible. Vincent knelt beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket with hands that trembled slightly. Maya Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the restaurant. You saved my life in ways you'll never understand. You challenged me, changed me, and loved me even when I was impossible to love. Will you marry me? Maya felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice caught somewhere between laughter and sobs. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. The restaurant erupted in applause as Vincent took her hand in his, a ring he had apparently been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to offer her everything he had to give. As Vincent helped her to her feet, and they stood together surrounded by the warm approval of strangers, Maya realized that sometimes the most beautiful victories came not from fighting against fate, but from surrendering to it completely. She had spent years building a life around the pursuit of justice. Now, for the first time, she was building a life around the pursuit of joy.